very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, just a couple of minutes past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi, and here is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. We start with Burkina Faso. France is recalling its ambassador to Burkina Faso a day after it announced that its military mission there was to end. The French Foreign Ministry said Luc Holland was returning for consultations on the state of relations between Paris and its former West African colony. There has been weeks of demonstrations against the French presence in Burkina Faso, whose military rulers have been seeking military assistance from Russia to help defeat an Islamist insurgency. Burkina Faso, which is currently battling an Islamist insurgency, says it wants to defend itself. There are currently 400 French special forces in Burkina Faso who have just 1 month to leave. Last year, French troops also left neighboring Mali, where they had spent 8 years fighting jihadists. France has kept close military links with many of its former colonies in West Africa and has been helping several of them fight jihadists who were active across the region under the now terminated Operation Burkina. Some 3,000 French soldiers are still deployed in West Africa, mostly in Niger and Chad. Its continued ties, especially economic, have led to some resentment of its influence with Russia, which Russia has tapped into. Both Mali and the Central African Republic are now working with the Russian mercenary group Wagner. Burkina Faso has denied reports it will also engage the Wagner group against the jihadists, but a liaison team from the mercenaries has already visited, according to some AFP news agency reports. A French Foreign Ministry spokesperson confirmed that the Burkinabe government had sent a written request for its troops to leave. And then we head over to Angola. Angola has expressed concern over the use of heavy military equipment in the war in Ukraine as Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visits the oil-rich South African country. In a statement on Wednesday, the Angolan Foreign Affairs Ministry said the use of increasingly sophisticated equipment might lead to a greater involvement of the different parties to the conflict and eventually lead to a third world war. The statement also highlighted Angola's historic friendship ties with Russia and its good cooperation with Ukraine. Angola initially abstained from condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but in October last year, it voted in favor of a UN resolution condemning the annexation of Ukrainian territory by Russia. And then we head over to Mali. A court in Mali has sentenced a man to death over the killing of 3 UN peacekeepers, MINUSMA, in the country's south in 2019. The accused, who was not named, was convicted of acts of terrorism, criminal association, murder, robbery, and illegal possession of firearms. The death penalty has not been applied in Mali since a moratorium on executions was put in place in 1980. In a statement, MINUSMA said this was the second time that specific attacks against its troops had been at the heart of a legal charge that has resulted in a trial and convictions. The MINUSMA peacekeeping force, which has had 12,000 troops in Mali since 2013, is the U.S. largest and deadliest operation. Peacekeepers are frequently killed or wounded in attacks by Al-Qaeda and Islamic State fighters. And Germany's foreign office has come under fire after taking aim at Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's tour of Africa, using an unpopular generalization about the continent. In a tweet, Germany's foreign office had said that the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov is in Africa not to see a leopard, but to bluntly claim that Ukraine's partners want to destroy everything Russian. Many were angered by the suggestion that Africa's wildlife was the only thing worth bringing the Russian envoy to the continent. Eba Kalondo, the spokesperson to the African Union chairperson, wondered whether the continent of Africa and its people and wildlife is a joke to them. Ms. Kalondo noted that German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock recently visited the African Union headquarters in Ethiopia, and she did pose a question: did she come to see animals? And also another tweet: how many times should we tell you that Africa is more than seeing wild animals? That was another tweet from Kofi Ebola now. On Wednesday, Germany agreed to send its Leopard tanks to Ukraine. For some time, it had resisted internal and external pressure to supply their tanks to the country. So I don't know if Africans missed that joke or they took it literally. We'll just come back to that, but let's move on to other news. In Nigeria, the authorities in the country say at least 27 Fulani herders were killed in an explosion near the border between the central states of Nasarawa and Benue on Tuesday. The police say they're investigating the cause of the explosion. The area has been frequent disputes over resources between pastoral and farming communities. Some local media reported that the explosion may have been a botched airstrike by the Nigerian military, but this has not been independently confirmed. And still staying with Nigeria, the United States government has announced a visa ban on some unnamed Nigerians for undermining the democratic process in a recent Nigerian election. In a statement on Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken described the action as a reflection of his government's commitment to supporting Nigeria's aspiration to combat corruption and strengthen democracy and the rule of law. The senior U.S. diplomat explained that the individuals affected will not be granted visas to enter the U.S. under a policy to restrict visas of those believed to be responsible for or complacent in undermining democracy in Nigeria. He also said that the family members may also be subject to these restrictions. Mr. Blinken, however, clarified that the visa ban was not targeted at the Nigerian people or the government. It comes barely 2 months after the political counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria, Rolf Olson, made a similar statement. In the lead up to the Edo and Ondo governorship polls of the 19th September and 10th October 2020, the U.S. government had also announced visa restrictions on some individuals. The country is due to hold its general elections on February the 25th. And then the latest from a summit that is happening in this continent. A summit on food security across Africa has had calls from the continent to feed itself rather than relying on aid or imports. The current Africa Union chairperson, Senegalese President Macky Sall, told the meeting in Dakar that Africa had huge potential that was not being exploited. According to the head of the African Development Bank, Akinwumi Adesina, 2/3 of world's uncultivatable arable land is in Africa. He said Africa can and must feed itself. Tens of millions of people in East Africa and the Sahel region face hunger because of drought, conflict, and a rise in the cost of food and fuel. Leaders attending the meeting have been urged to recommit to a pledge agreed 2 decades ago to devote 10% of the government budgets to agriculture and rural development. Now, the Somalia airspace has regained its Class A classification. After more than 30 years, the International Air Transport Association said IATA confirmed the reclassification of the Mogadishu Flight Information Region airspace. In a statement on Wednesday, Class A airspace is the sky above the base altitude of about 24,500 feet, or about 7,467 meters above sea level, according to IATA. In it, all flights must be cleared by air traffic control, which is responsible for maintaining the correct separation between aircraft, which require the Mogadishu FIR to install new equipment. IATA said the move will significantly improve safety in the region and enhance efficiency. The reclassification of Somalia airspace to Class A took effect at 1 a.m. local time on Thursday, Somali officials have confirmed. And the trial of a former Mauritanian President Mohamed Ould Abdelaziz opened on Wednesday in Nouakchott, offering the exceptional image of a former head of state placed in a cage-like box to answer for illicit enrichment. Tried for abusing his power to amass huge fortune, the man who led from 2008 to 2019 this largely desert country of 4.5 million people, twice the size of France, stood up and waved when his name was called, then sat down behind the gates in the front row of 10 defendants present. Former presidents, prime ministers, ministers and businessmen, they are charged with illicit enrichment, abuse of office, influence peddling, and money laundering for unknown period time. Mr. Aziz, who is 66 years old, has denied the facts and cries of a plot to remove him from politics. Okay, so now hundreds of opposition activists took to the streets of Johannesburg in South Africa on Wednesday to demonstrate against the energy crisis causing record power cuts in the country. The activists from the opposition's Democratic Alliance marched towards the headquarters of the ruling ANC party. Scheduled blackouts, known as load shedding, have been a part of daily life in South Africa for years, with state-owned energy firm Eskom failing to keep pace with demand and maintain its aging coal power infrastructure. But in the last 12 months, the outages have reached new extremes, with lights going off several times a day, sometimes for almost 12 hours. In total, President Cyril Ramaphosa said this week it was understandable that people were fed up and that the crisis, which was wreaking havoc on the country, but warned it will not be fixed overnight. At an ANC meeting earlier this week, the president said the government was looking to import electricity from abroad and add production from renewable energy sources. We head over to the DRC. In the country bustling's capital, Kinshasa, the faithful are flocking to impromptu market stalls in churchyards to buy T-shirts and work tissues adorned with the image of Pope Francis ahead of the Pontiff's visit. Papal souvenirs have become a hot-selling item in the city ahead of the Argentinian Pope's 4-day trip to the deep later that escalating conflict in the eastern DRC, where the Pope had been due to visit, prompted a rethink. M23 rebel group, which is allegedly backed by Rwanda, has waged an offensive against the Congolese military and recently come within several miles of Goma. Came near several miles of Goma, a commercial hub of over 1 million people and capital of North Kivu province. Pope Francis is no longer due to go to the eastern Congo according to his new program, but he will meet victims of the conflict while in Kinshasa. And we end the bulletin from Cameroon. On Monday, Cameroon turned down a mediation offer from Canada, which had volunteered to help bring up a dialogue between Yaoundé and insurgents in the English-speaking regions in a bid to end a 6-year conflict that has killed over 6,000 people. On Friday, Canada had announced that it had accepted the mandate to facilitate the peace process in Cameroon, including negotiations and confidence-building measures between the government and some separatist factions to resolve the bloody armed conflict that has also uprooted nearly 800,000 from their homes. But in a release, Mr. Ren Emmanuel Sali, the Central Africa country's government spokesperson and Minister of Communication, said in Cameroon Cameroon has not entrusted any foreign country to external entity with any role of mediator or facilitator to settle the crisis. Sadi said the conflict, which has deprived 600,000 children of full access to education, is an internal problem, and it is up to the Cameroonian people, the institutions and the leaders that they have freely chosen to seek appropriate ways of addressing the internal problems. According to the peace process on Friday, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Choli said parties in the conflict had agreed during pre-talks to enter a process to reach a comprehensive, peaceful and political resolution of the conflict. And that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. The last time we were having this show yesterday, I couldn't. So I think it was on Tuesday, and I was just bringing you up to date with that news. And I think I told you that the Canadian government had agreed to mediate through this process that has caused a lot of human suffering in between. It has been a conflict between the Cameroonian government and the Anglophones, who have been fighting now. A new bout of fighting erupted in 2017 because they want to secede and form their own country, and they have a name for it. It's Amazonia. The history dates way back. Okay, and so there has been some what do you call it, mediation. In fact, the last one that was held in 2019, the Cameroonian government termed it a national dialogue, but it was a national dialogue that did not have proper a representation of the people that were supposed to be sitting on that dialogue table to have a proper conversation, because the leaders of the Anglophones had just been sentenced, I think almost a year from before that dialogue, had been sentenced to life in imprisonment in Cameroon. So if the leaders of this movement had been sentenced to life imprisonment, and yet you're having a dialogue with the same movement, so who are you talking to? So that's what I mean by saying it was not properly and comprehensively inclusive, because the key people who are supposed to be part of that dialogue were not present in that dialogue. And then on top of that, the government of Cameroon had come out with a set of agenda that it wanted to be discussed during this national dialogue. And of course, secession was not one of them, but I think they tried to address the issue of bilingualism, which I think they're trying to implement. I don't know how that is working. But you see, the key thing is the Anglophones are saying we want to secede because of this and this and the other. So if secession is at the core of this conflict in Cameroon, and yet you're purporting to have a national dialogue, but you will not sit down and discuss the elephant in the room. In fact, the government said that will not even form part of anything they want to discuss. But I think perhaps it would have been a dialogue that would have been encouraged, so that maybe you open up, the government opens up to hear why is it that these people want to secede? What is the problem? And as a government, are we able to do something to ensure that perhaps some of these problems are solved, so that the people from the Anglophone region don't get to feel how they normally express, that they feel like they're second-class citizen in Cameroon? So maybe that would have been part of the dialogue agenda, President Paul Biya, so that you're able to hear what these people are saying and what are the key factors driving the need for a section of a population in your country are saying that secession and forming our own country is the only way we feel that we can have our lives in a way that we want, because as it is right now, the larger Cameroon is not working for us. So the fact that being a key problem, but was not part of the agenda, so essentially that dialogue was not comprehensive. And even after that dialogue happened, nothing really much has been able to take place. So now there has been bouts of every now and then you hear of people being killed, people being kidnapped, and I think these different groups in the Anglophone region, they've also allegedly formed some other gangs and militant groups that are really out there fighting the government, and in the process they get to cause a lot of insecurity in the same areas, and the government forces are doing the same. We've seen several attacks happening in that region, and the government forces have even, I think, they have confessed in participating in another banning of a school that happened a couple of years ago, and banning of a hospital, and kidnapping, rape, and things like that. So both sides have been complacent and have been participating in these human rights abuses that have been ongoing in this northwest and northeast areas in Cameroon. This is where the Anglophones are. So as I was here talking about it on Tuesday, I thought it was a wonderful idea that Canada would be the country to convene this mediation process, because as we know, the area is restive, and I think it's important. I thought it was important, and it was great that Canada was doing this, because the last I checked, Canada is one country that does not have a lot of vested interest in countries, especially in Africa. And so I thought maybe it is a neutral country and a neutral entity, an actor who perhaps would inspire confidence both for the government of Cameroon and these other groups that represent the interests of the Anglophones. But a lot of times these groups have been split, so sometimes you don't even know whose interest they're really representing, because in the manner in which they agitate for these things that they want fixed by the government of Cameroon. And I was happy, and I said, you know what, this is a story that we've been talking about for a very long time. And so I said I'm invested, and I'll be following keenly this mediation process, because it will be very important that we find a solution is gotten in that part in Cameroon. And now, what I just read to you there earlier is that the government of Cameroon is saying no. We're not interested in anybody coming here and trying to help us solve the problem in Cameroon. And they're saying whatever is happening in Cameroon, it is an internal matter, and we've not been in talks, because from the communication I had with me when I was giving you the story on Tuesday, people who have been named as parties to this mediation process included the government of Cameroon. So now for them to come in and saying, no, we have not accepted, we don't want to be part of this, and we have not entrusted any foreign country or external entity with any role of mediator or facilitator to settle this crisis. And that is what Sadi said. And Sadi is this is the speaker for Mr. Rene Emmanuel Sadi is the government spokesperson and Minister of Communication. So he is obviously expressing the position of the Cameroonian government on this matter. And he said it's up to the Cameroonian people, the institutions and the leaders that they have freely chosen to seek appropriate ways of addressing their internal problems. First of all, I will not even go to the part of the freely chosen, because we know how Paul Biya has been leading Cameroon. There's been a lack of democratic practice in Cameroon. The opposition, remember the leader, what is his name? Maurice somebody, had been put in jail after the elections had happened in 2018. He served for a while. Maurice Kamto, and then he was released just about during that time. Was it after that shambolic national dialogue that happened in 2019? So you can't talk to us about the people who have been freely chosen when we know the undemocratic process that the Cameroonian elections have been having. And President Paul Biya is the longest serving president in the continent of Africa. So talk to us about something else. So you're saying this is an internal problem in Cameroon, and the people of Cameroon will be able to solve this problem. And I do agree with you. This is a Cameroonian problem, and it's up to the Cameroonian people. But so far, Mr. Rene Emmanuel Sadi, the Minister of Communication and the government spokesperson, the government of Cameroon has shown very little willingness to really want to engage in finding a lasting solution to this crisis, to this conflict that has been ongoing. So if it's a Cameroonian people's problem, and I agree with you, and it's an internal matter, and I agree with you, but it becomes an international matter when we see how the government and what has been ongoing in that part of Cameroon, the levels of human rights abuses, the levels in which even the army itself goes there to commit some of these human rights abuses, then now it becomes the rest of us is business, and now we have to talk about it. And it is no longer a Cameroonian affair. Matter of fact, I don't know why African Union has not found it necessary to call for a meeting to discuss what is happening in Cameroon, even when we've seen the heightened, blatant abuses that have been going on in there. And so you're saying this is a matter that the Cameroon and the institutions in Cameroon, which clearly, I don't know how well the institutions are working. I mean, in 2019, when you were sentencing those leaders of Anglophone, these sentencing and these court processes were done in a military court, and a military court, that is a court that only takes care of military matters. So what were civilians doing being tried in a military court, and the timing in which even this sentencing was done towards the wee hours of the morning? So if those are the kinds of institutions you're talking about, then I would understand why a section of the people of Cameroon would not have a confidence in the manner in which these institutions operate. And so clearly you've not been able to do much to sort out and to address effectively this crisis in Cameroon. And that's why a country like Canada is willing and is offering itself to try and help you, to try and mediate. And Canada seems to be a neutral party. I could be wrong. Maybe if somebody out there is watching and you perhaps Canada has been mentioned in something, or there's a conflict of interest there, I would like to know. But the last I checked, Canada seems to me to be a very neutral country and a neutral actor who perhaps only interest will be to find a solution, and a lasting solution for that matter, so that we can have this problem problem solved once and for all. Otherwise, when you keep sweeping these things and hoping that it will go away, you're only postponing a problem. So I think it's about time that the Cameroonian government got really serious in wanting to solve this crisis between the government of Cameroon and the Anglophones in the northeast and northwest areas there in Cameroon. Otherwise, we will keep postponing this problem, hoping that it will solve itself over time. Time has proved that will not work, and people who have decided and who feel that they have their cause is something that is even worth dying for, and that is a people that is very difficult to just hope one day they will shut up. It will not happen. So I think the more perhaps the government is open to such initiatives and such dialogues that is not as shambolic as that which the government of Cameroon held in 2019, I have explained that, then I think the better it will be for the parties involved. So I think the government of Cameroon, I think you turning down this opportunity might not be for the best interest in that country, because you have not solved this problem. These institutions and these leaders that you're mentioning, they have proved that they're unable to handle this problem. They're unable to address this effectively. So perhaps you might need some help, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think Canada, it could be a good actor and a good just space that could help the both parties to just find a solution moving forward. And I've said here several times, there's nothing wrong with the peace talks and negotiations. Sometimes they can go a long way in solving a problem. Halfway, it can help. So let's embrace that. But the government of Cameroon has said they're not really interested. Okay, so we're having a summit on food security across Africa, and our wonderful leaders are meeting there. And of course, the current chairperson of the African Union, Senegalese President Macky Sall, say that Africa can feed itself. I mean, we know that. Who does not know that Africa can feed itself? And Africa can feed itself. The reason why Africa cannot feed itself is something that has always baffled me. The reason why Africa would be the place that we see a huge amount of food aid coming from countries that are arid and semi-arid, who do not have even the amount of rain that we enjoy here and the good climate that we have in this continent. That is something that baffles me. And as a Kenyan, every time I see, because parts of our country is arid and semi-arid, and so during a time like this, when we're having high sunshine and all that, there's been a lot of famine, there's been a lot of hunger, and we've seen a lot of Kenyans suffer. And that breaks my heart because I know we have another part of the country, the same Kenya, that we get bountiful of harvest, and because of poor policies that are in place, a lot of this goes to waste. And our leadership in such areas, even the national government, this one and the ones that have preceded it, have refused to find ways where we can have systems in place to ensure we don't have much wastage during harvesting time, that we can employ technology when it comes to farming here in the country, and many other. I think this is a situation replicated across other countries, and then we can really address the issue of us being able to feed ourselves. There's no reason. You cannot convince me that Kenya cannot feed itself. I refuse to accept that, and many other African countries. So these leaders are sitting there in this meeting, and they're trying to tell us that Africa can feed itself. We already know that, and according to the head of the African Development Bank, he said 2/3 of the world's uncultivated arable lands is in Africa. So we have arable lands. 2/3 of the world's uncultivated arable land is in Africa. Pause and think about it. I'm just trying to be very rational about it, okay? So 2/3 of the world's arable land that is uncultivated. So you'll find that we have a lot of these arable lands, okay? These are the fertile lands that should be producing us this food and making it possible for us to feed itself. Majority of them are in the rural areas, in the villages and all that. So you find that we have a lot of young people moving into the cities to look for jobs, And yet they leave these lands there uncultivated, because according to this report, 2/3 of uncultivated. So we leave our wealth lying there while we come and we migrate, a lot of us in the cities, and then we have the mushrooming of these slums and all these places with poor living conditions in the name of trying to look for work in the cities, while we could be doing something with this natural wealth that God has given us. I think until we change how we approach certain things in this continent, something is seriously amiss. And it starts with the leadership, with our leaders and their priorities. And some of these leaders that we have in this continent are clueless about what is important as far as taking care of their citizens is concerned. Food security should be at the top of every country in Africa as a priority, and not just putting it there as something that needs to be done, but actually taking steps and putting in policies and going to countries like Israel and see how are you people able to do it with the kind of climate you have, with the kind of land you have. We have better back in Africa, but how are you able to merge technology and agriculture, and how are you able to ensure that your people are fed instead of this silly benchmarking missions we take across the world, come back, spend money, waste taxpayers' money, and come back with zero knowledge and not implement nothing, and the situation continues becoming worse. I think we have to wake up. We have to wake up. And as much as I like to sit here and blame this leadership, guess what? They're a reflection of who we are. We keep electing them, we keep putting them in these positions. They're not working for us, but we keep placing them there because they're from my tribe, because they're from my clan, because they're from my district, because they're from my province, because they're from my state, because they speak my language, because they are from the same religion. Do you know those are the basis by which we elect our leaders, and then we get surprised that we have what we have today, and they sit there preaching the gospel of Africa can feed itself. We know Africa can feed itself, but as leaders, as heads of state who are meeting in this summit, what are you doing to ensure that your people are food secure? I'd like to know, when my president comes back from this summit, his plan on how Kenya is going to be food secure. I think I want to know that as a Kenyan and every other citizen where you are in this continent. When your leaders come back from this summit, please ask them, after now knowing what they know and the information that they've been given by the African Development Bank head, Akinwumi Adesina. He said Africa has 2/3 of the world's uncultivated arable land. When they come back, you ask them, so fine, so you have this information, and fine, the conversation you're having there is that Africa is able to feed itself. So now, as the head of state and as the leader, what is your plan? How can we put this? How can we implement this? What policies can we put in place? How can we support our farmers? How can we support our agriculture industry? And how can we do better in ensuring we are able to feed our people without having to listen? When I see them at the airport, you see ministers standing there receiving cartons of powdered milk, receiving at the port, receiving maize from I don't know where in the name of food aid. Let me tell you, I get annoyed. And the reason why I get annoyed is because I know my country can do better. I know my country can sustain itself and the people and can feed its people and still remain with some surplus and give and sell out. But because of poor governance, because of poor policies, because of a leadership that is unwilling to do different and to do better, we find ourselves in this situation. So the current administration is still very new in this position. So I'll cut them some slack, President William Ruto. But I'm just hoping that you're clear and you have policies in place, because in a year's time, in 2 years' time, this thing of Kenyans dying in one part of the country because of hunger, and the other part of the country, food is going to waste. This nonsense has to stop. And the rest of the other African countries, okay? Well, this is a matter that I'm very passionate about, so excuse me if I sound like I'm venting. Maybe I am. All right, so another matter that really I know we talked about it earlier. The U.S. imposing a visa ban on certain Nigerians who are undermining democracy. Nigeria is going to its elections on the 25th next month. And so the U.S. has imposed visas, and they're saying additional persons who undermine the democratic process in Nigeria, including and leading up to and during the following elections in 2023, they feel is right for them. But the problem I have with the U.S. and some of these things and policies and these bans that it puts in place, I just have a problem with the double standards. So if you're telling us that the reason why you're placing a visa ban on some of these people is because they're undermining democratic process in the upcoming Nigerian elections, and yet you just hosted the Africa Leaders and US Summit in December. Remember that happened in December, from December 13th to the December 15th? And guess who went there? There are only 4 countries, no 5, that didn't go. And that is Eritrea, because the US normally refers to Eritrea as a pariah state. It does not even recognize it. And the president Isaias Afwerki, all right? And then, of course, Sudan did not go. Guinea did not go, Burkina Faso did not go, and Mali did not go because they have military leaders, and after the coups happened. So 5 countries did not go, but the rest went. No, the rest went, and also the others who sent representatives. I think President of Zimbabwe, who has a travel ban, but the US had lifted it during that time to allow him go there, but I think he refused. I would refuse to be honest with you. But so they went, including the worst of the leadership that we have in this continent, who forever have undermined the democratic processes in their country. President Yoweri Museveni in Uganda, President Paul Kagame, see how their democracy is working in Rwanda? Zero. President of Equatorial Guinea, Mr. Nguema, President of Djibouti, I believe, he has been there forever. President of which one? Paul Biya of Cameroon, who's been there. These are people who democracy means something completely different. When it comes to democracy, they live in an alternative world. But you had no problem hosting them during that summit in the US, knowing very well their track record as far as democratic processes is concerned. But today, because you have some interest there in Nigeria, you're coming out to tell us that so-and-so has been offered a visa ban because they're undermining a democratic process in a democratic country, while you have no problem sitting down and hosting a dinner with some of the worst leaders in this continent that have treated their people in the worst way possible. They are undemocratic, they are corrupt, they are murderers, they're the worst. The creme de la creme of the worst leadership you could ever think about in this continent. You did not have a problem hosting these people. But now you have a problem with a few who you feel are undermining the democratic republic, the democratic process in Nigeria. Well, that could be true. I'm just fed up with this double standard. From U.S. is continuing to exhibit. I'm just tired of it, and I think it has lost its moral place when it comes to even calling out or holding leaders to a democratic standard. You can't come talk to us here about holding these people accountable because of undermining a democracy. While we had the same happen in the US a couple of years ago, that person who led that process that undermined your democracy is still walking around, is still being is still enjoying state protection, is still a free man, even with the overwhelming evidence that has made so many people go to jail. You've still not been able to bring him to book, and you're here coming to tell us that you are prefecting about democratic practices in this continent. I think you lost that position. You have the moral authority to lecture us about how to practice democracy. It's bad. We choose to apply it how we apply it. I'm not saying, and we do have a lot of democracy deficit in this continent, I agree. And we have bad leadership, I agree. We have poor governance systems in this continent, I agree. But it is not your position. You can't pick and choose. When it comes to democracy, where is the yardstick? Who do we pick? Who do we cherry pick? Who do we punish? that is not how that works. And when you invited all these leaders in Washington over December, I think that is the point. Me and US and democracy, I think that is the point. I was just done looking, listening to what the US has to say about democracy. So anyway, France has recalled its ambassador from Burkina Faso. The last time we were having this conversation, I think I was reminding us what Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations in 1961 says. And I think Article 29 is very explicit, and it says if a country can decide it does not want your ambassador in their country, and there's nothing the sending state can do if a receiving state refuses to have your person. So you only have to negotiate and talk, and if they refuse, and you take your person. So France had been denying these rumors, as we're terming it, this report, and now they're saying it's true, and so they have recalled the French Foreign Ministry to Burkina Faso, Luc Holland, and they're saying that he's returning back to Paris for consultations on the state of relations between Paris and former West African colony. And then also Burkina Faso's military junta, who are now in power after the ousting of President Christian Kabore, have given the French army about a month to leave. Okay, is it not the same script from Mali? They're just following that script from Mali, and so I'm not surprised. Like I said here on Tuesday, I'm really not surprised. I'm really expecting that this will happen, and then of course Burkina Faso has been denying ties with Russian mercenaries. In fullness of time, we'll see if their position is true or not. But that is what is happening. So France has to get their diplomat back, but if they get another person that is acceptable to Burkina Faso, then the person will be able to be received by Burkina Faso. But according to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, there's nothing France can do if Burkina Faso has refused to have their person there. And I think that's where I want to stop this afternoon. I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been Diaspora Dispatches. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye for now.